Nina always found it strange not to have a surname like the other orphanage colleagues. When he asked caregivers, he only received dry smiles or evasive answers, as if his past were an annoying ghost. At the age of 7, he already understood that there was something wrong, not with her, but with the silence around her. While the other children received occasional visits or letters with empty promises, Nina was forgotten until time. His belongings fit in a shoebox, and the only thing he carried on his chest was a leaf-shaped pendant, an apparent value. They said it was left with her the day they found her, wrapped in cloths at the orphanage door. But what hurt most was not abandonment, it was emptiness. Nina grew up with a curiosity that burned inside her. Who was your mother? Where was she? Would you have sorry? These questions turned voices in his head during the cold dawn, where only the roof's creak kept company. That morning of cloud-free sky, as he swept the patio of cracked cement, Nina heard the director say something that froze her heart. She's alive. I didn't know who they said, but something inside her shouted. She would never be the same quiet girl as before. In the older donation room, where broken toys and owner-free clothes were kept, Nina searched for anything that linked her to that mysterious phrase. And that's where, between yellowish papers and an eyeless bear, she found a stuffed drawer, forgotten at the bottom of a rusty cabinet. With effort, opened the compartment. There was a letter without sender, folded around a faded portrait. The woman in the photo had sad eyes, but there was something familiar on the curve of the chin, the expression of the look. Nina felt her heart accelerate. On the back of the image, a filed letter annotation. For my daughter. One day she will understand. The roll of the letter was torn, as if someone had tried to destroy it in a hurry. But part of the message was still readable. I never wanted to leave it. The danger was real. A bull. I had no choice. That made no sense and at the same time made all the meaning of the world. With his hands shaking, Nina hid the photo in her pocket and ran out of the warehouse. For the first time, there was a track small, fragile, but a real spark that could light the flame she had been waiting for years. And deep in his chest, he felt that his life was about to turn around. That night Nina's nightmares were different. It was no longer the dark darkness or the distant voices calling for it. Now there was a clear image. The open field, a hull sound against the floor and a scream tearing the night like a razor. She woke up panting, with the cold sweat dripping by the neck. He got up from the bed and went to the bedroom window. The moon illuminated the dry garden of the orphanage and, in the distance, the shadows of the trees danced with the wind. It was then that he heard, not in a dream, but in reality, a sound coming from the gate. A woman, weak, almost without voice, called Nina. He went down the silent corridors, passing the closed doors and the crooked paintings of the walls. When he arrived at the gate, there was no one, just a white scarf tied to the rusty iron. The handkerchief had the same embroidery as the pendant she carried from a baby. A sheet. The scream still echoed inside her, and there was no doubt. Something called her. Her mother was alive, and she needed her. But what did this have to do with a bull? Why did this presence seem so close, and at the same time so dangerous? The next day, Nina fled the orphanage. He had only taken the picture, the handkerchief and courage I didn't even know I had. He walked to the nearby village and went straight to the square of the square where the old people gathered to play dominoes and talk about the lives of others. She knew that everyone lived there. He approached a gentleman with white hair and sunburned skin, known as Zay Tattoo. They said he knew everything, but he spoke little. Nina showed the photo, hopeful. The old man paled. He looked around, swallowed dry, and murmured, "This woman, she disappeared after the tragedy of the Barbosa farm Taurus." Nina didn't understand. Zay Tattoo, however, continued, "It was on a party day, when they let go of that animal thinking it was tamed. He went crazy. He ran to the people, and she saved a child but was never seen again." His voice failed for a moment. "They said it died, but I saw. She ran away, and I was pregnant." Those words made Nina's world stop. The woman in the photo was really her mother. And there was a farm, a bull, a covered tragedy. The old man took a roll and wrote a name, Barbosa Farm. If she's alive, that's where you'll know the truth. But beware, girl. There's something there should never be awake. The dirt road that led to the old Barbosa farm seemed never-ending. Nina walked under the strong sun, with her handkerchief stuck to her neck and thoughts spinning as whirlpools in her mind. All she had was a photo, a name, and the desire to hear at least once the voice of the woman who gave her life. Upon arriving at the entrance of the farm, he noticed a small old cemetery next to the main house. The tombstones were simple, covered with moss, with names almost erased by time. A tomb, however, caught his attention. The only one that was surrounded by artificial flowers, carefully exchanged, but with no date of death. Just a name, Mary of Peace. Your heart beat faster. The name sounded so intimate, so close. And what else shocked her was to realize that there, in that decorated tombstone, there was no buried body. It was a symbolic tomb, as if someone wanted to bury a memory, not a person. There was a cloth rose tied to the center, made of the same fabric of the scarf Nina carried. Emotion rose as fire for his throat. That was more than a coincidence. It was a sign that his mother had been there, or was still. But why pretend death? And why so secret around a simple tomb? Nina knew that the truth was close, and that every step that took her deeper into the past that many tried to forget. While waiting for the night to fall to enter the farm without being seen, Nina remembered something that had bothered her for a long time. Once, when he was 8, he woke up early and saw smoke from the bottom of the orphanage. Curious, he approached silently. It was the director, Dona Berenice, throwing papers on the fire of a rusty drum. The flames illuminated her severe face, and what she said low was recorded in the girl's memory. No one needs to know. It's better. For her good. At the time, Nina didn't understand what she meant, but now, connecting the points, she felt a knot squeeze in her throat. Would they be those cards of your mother? The orphanage has always refused to give him any information about his past. The director avoided her questions, and caregivers changed the subject. But what if your mother had tried? And if she had written, cried in each envelope, and all those words were burned before her eyes, without her knowing? The revolt that grew within Nina was silent but dense as lead. Someone chose for her. Someone hid their story. Now, in the face of that rusty gate of Barbosa Farm, she swore to herself, no matter what she has to face, not even a furious bull, she would go to the end. The next morning, before infiltrating the farm, Nina decided to go through the village market to try to collect more information. It was a simple place, beaten ground and wooden stalls, where everything from fruits to secrets was sold at a fair price. Walking among the marketers, she heard 2 ladies talking, with baskets full of green corn. They say that woman came back, yes. Only appears at night near the back house, murmured one of them, lowering his voice as he sees Nina approach. The girl pretended to look for apples, but her ear was attentive. Do you talk about Maria de Paz? He asked the other with wide eyes. Yes, herself. There are people who say she never got out of there. Just hid. Nina couldn't contain herself. She suddenly turned and asked, Do you know this woman? Do you know where she is? The ladies looked at each other, surprises with the girl's boldness. The oldest replied, hesitating, Are you a relative of her? Nina just shook her head with teary eyes. The answer came in a voice. She lives in the hood behind the old shed, but beware, girl. They say the bull still surrounds there. The revelation shook her as a lightning. Your mother was there, alive, hidden in silence, perhaps injured, perhaps haunted by the past. But the presence of the bull seemed more than a physical threat. It was like a guardian between mother and daughter, a monster put there for a cruel destination. Nina knew she would have to face him, alone. When Nina arrived at the side entrance of the farm, she realized that the huts of the old pawns were almost all ruined. One of them, however, seemed to be inhabited. There were clothes drying in a makeshift clothesline and a new curtain rocking in the window. But what caught the most attention was dense silence, as if there, until the wind was afraid to blow. She knocked on the door with hesitation. No one answered. He hit again, firmer. When I was thinking of leaving, a crack opened, and an elderly face, marked by deep wrinkles and eyes of suspicion, emerged. He was a black lady with a handkerchief on her head, and looking at whom she had seen what no one else dared to remember. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a whisper. "They don't like them to touch this name." "What name?" Nina asked, even knowing the answer. The woman looked around, as if expecting her own wind to report her. Then he said, very low, "Maria de Paz. It's the name the farm buried, but that did not die. That woman challenged death and came back. But she paid a price that no one else would bear." With each word, Nina felt a shiver up the spine. Why so much fear? What kind of story does your mother carry? And who were them? You squeezed your arm tightly, like a final warning. If you're really her daughter, you'll need courage. Because it's not just a bull that awaits you. It's the truth. And she knows how to be more cruel than any beast. At the edge of the road surrounding Barbosa Farm, Nina spotted a man mounted on a brown horse, watching the field as who keeps something invisible. It was a tall, thin beard, old hat and sun-tuned skin. She approached with caution, and he soon noticed her. His eyes, however, were not of curiosity. They were of fear. "You are the orphanage girl, right?" he asked even before she said anything. Nina confirmed with a nod. The man went down his horse slowly, looking at the field as if something could emerge from nothing. "Your name is Nina?" She nodded again, surprised. He sighed, tense. "The farm recognizes you. The earth feels when a secret comes back to seek answers." She swallowed hard and asked in a firm voice, "Did you know Maria de Paz?" The cowboy hesitated. Then he took off his hat and looked at the floor. "I met, and I saw what she did. I saw with those eyes when she faced the bull to save the boss's son. She bled there in that field, and yet got up and fled. He has never returned. So far." Nina felt a chill. The story beat what old Zay Tattoo had said. But there was more, much more. "Is the bull still there?" she asked, her voice embargoed. The cattle raised his eyes, finally staring at her. "He never left. No one can kill him. They say he keeps her soul, or perhaps stop her from leaving." The gate that separated the main fields from the background shed was made of thick iron, already covered with rust and vines that grew without order. It was there, imposing and forgotten, as if it kept a while no one else daring to remember. Nina stopped before him with a rapid heart. That was not just a physical barrier, it was the line between the truth and everything she knew. In the center of the gate was a thick chain, attached by a lock as old as the farm. Preached in one of the pillars, a faded warning said only, "Dangerous property, forbidden entry." But what really caught the eye was a brand dug into the iron. An embroidered sheet, exactly the same as the pendant that Nina carried on her chest. She leaned her hand on the symbol, feeling a strange vibration in the touch. A wind blew, raising dry dust from the floor. It was then that he heard, across the fence, the sound of something heavy breathing. A serious, animalistic breath, followed by a hoof drag. The bull was there, and it seemed to know that she too. Without thinking twice, Nina looked around, took a deep breath and began to climb through one of the gate's rusty sides. Each step was a challenge, every noise, a fright. But she couldn't go back. Whatever waiting for her on the other side was the only chance to hear her mother. Before it was late, Nina fell across the gate with a dry thud, raising dust and dried leaves. The silence there was different, heavy, almost sacred. The girl got up slowly, watching the abandoned warehouses ahead, each more worn than the other, as if the earth itself had forgotten that place. And then she saw something that stopped her heart. A window with a white curtain fluttering, and behind her, two eyes watched her. It was fast, a second perhaps, but enough to recognize them. The same eyes of photography, the same deep sadness, the same shine hidden in the tired look. Nina ran toward the small house at the bottom of the ground, where the glasses were broken and the wood smelled of the mold and memory. Each step seemed to pull her into a dream or abyss. She knocked on the door and got no answer. He shouted, "Mom!" and the sound of his own voice made her tremble. The doorknob yielded easily. The interior was simple, dark, but clean. On the table, a plate of still hot food. Someone lived there. Someone who was waiting for her, or who still didn't know she had arrived. In the mirror hanging on the wall, next to a crooked crucifix, there was the same photograph Nina found in the orphanage, only larger, framed. Below, written by hand with red paint, read, "Forgive me, my daughter." The tears finally escaped. She was in the right place. Now it was all that left to find her. Before the bull found her first. The cathedral was empty, but impregnated with presence. Nina could feel. It was as if each wall whispering memories. He took the photograph of the frame and kept in his pocket, as if it were a shield. Outside, the sun was beginning to hide behind the hills, painting the sky with copper tones. She knew she needed to act before the night brought her own monsters. Following a narrow trail in the back of the house, he found a clay road that cut the pasture toward an old barn. With each step, the floor sank under its feet, and the sounds of the farm seemed more intense, branches breaking in the distance. Muffled, the distant sound of hulls scratching the dry soil. The road was long, but time was short. While walking, memories that were not yours invaded your mind. He imagined his mother there, young, pregnant, fleeing, perhaps injured, perhaps desperate. He thought of the footsteps she herself repeated, guided by a destination that seemed to rewrite herself with each footprint. And even with fear corroding her inside, Nina felt strangely strong, as if something ancestral pushed her forward. At the end of the road, he found an old-fashioned wooden gate. Besides him, a vast and silent field. And in the center, like a living painting, a kneeling woman, head down, with the same scarf that Nina carried stuck to her hair. The girl felt the air escape her lungs. It was her, your mother. But between the two, at the limit of the clearing, a shadow moved. The bull. Nina stopped before the fence that delimited the field where her mother kneeling. The wood was rotten, but still erected as a symbolic barrier between the present and the past, between the girl seeking answers and the woman who kept them. This fence was known to the former residents as the line of the curse. Few dared to cross it since the tragedy. On the other side, the bull slowly emerged from the shadow. It was a huge animal, dark coat and eyes that did not belong to an ordinary animal. There was something human in his gaze, a contained fury, a trapped pain. When he raised his head and looked straight at Nina, she felt time stopping. The world has silenced. Her breath arrested in her throat. Behind the bull, the scarf wife lifted her face. It was her, Mary of Peace. Her eyes were teary, her body bent, but her soul was whole. "Nina," she murmured, almost inaudible, but the sound was enough. The name stated by the mother echoed inside the girl as a thunder of love and longing. However, among them was still the beast. The fence crackled when Nina put her hand over the wood. He knew that simple and small gesture was also a challenge to fate. She didn't hesitate. With a firm step, he crossed the fence that no one dared to cross 20 years ago. Not for courage, but for something even greater. The desperate need to hear the last truth that life still owed. As soon as Nina crossed the fence, an unexpected sound cut the silence of the field. The bell of the old farm chapel, the one who has not touched since the day of tragedy. The metallic echo reverberated throughout the valley, but not only the memory of the earth, but the fears buried in it. The bull stopped walking. His eyes blinked once, and then he was still, as if that sound had disarmed him for a short moment. The girl cringed instinctively, her heart hammering in her chest. But the sound of the bell involved it as an old, familiar song. It was a warning, a call, a scream of time for the story to be resolved at last. Across the countryside, Maria de Paz tried to lift with difficulty. She reached for her daughter, and something in her eyes said, "Now or never." Nina started walking. Each step seemed to shake the floor. The bull, although stopped, observed with intensity. There was a sacred tension in the air, as if the whole universe had stopped to watch that moment. The sound of the bell echoed again, stronger, and with it came memories that Nina never lived, as if her mother's story was being blown in the wind. A few meters from the mother, the girl stopped. The bull snorted, threatening to move forward, but did not. Maria whispered, "He protected me all these years, but today he needs to let you pass." And at that moment, as if he understood, the beast turned slowly and walked away, disappearing into the fog of dusk. The bell rang one last time. The passage was free. The whole farm seemed to arrest his breath. The bull was still close, although already moving away, but Nina didn't look away. Its feet spiked on the floor, the small body in the face of that animal's immensity, and yet no tremor. Not for the absence of fear, but because there, in that sacred land, she knew she needed to be stronger than the story itself. The bull stopped for a second, as if looking back. His eyes found Nina's. There was no anger, just tiredness. Something in that look said he also carried a burden. Perhaps he was the last guardian of a promise made a long time ago. And now, seeing his daughter before his mother, he understood that his role was coming to an end. Nina took a few more steps. The earth under his feet was damp and smelled of roots, silence, memory. Upon reaching Mary of Peace, she knelt beside her. No word was said for a moment, only hands that met, small, wounded but firm. Mother and daughter, separated for so many years, were now joined before the land that tried to separate them. The bull in the background let out one last mute. It was no threat, no challenge. It was a goodbye. And then, as guided by something larger, he crossed the field and disappeared between the trees. Nina didn't cry, didn't tremble. She looked at her mother and said, with the voice of those who faced everything to be there, "I came to hear you." And at that moment, time bent in the courage of a girl. After the silent reunion, Maria de Paz pointed to the old barn to the north of the countryside. His lips were cracked, his breathing, but the urgency in his gaze spoke louder than any word. Under the floor, "You need to know," he murmured, his voice interspersed with pain. Nina, confused, helped her mother lean under a tree and ran toward the barn. The construction was crooked, with loose boards and sunk roof. The smell of wet wood and lost time hovered in the air. Inside, it was dark except for a crack of light that crossed the cracked ceiling. Nina sought with her eyes until she found a small opening on the floor, hidden under a dry hay carpet. He knelt and began to dig to his own hands. The earth was compact, but something soon hit its fingers. An iron box, heavy and covered with rust. With effort, she pulled her out and forced the lid. Inside, he found documents, letters, an alliance, a birth certificate, and a photo that made her shudder. He was the farm's boss, the most powerful man in the region, hugging his mother. In the verse, written by hand, "Our love against everything," the letters revealed a forbidden romance, a hidden daughter, and a desperate attempt to restart. The bull had not been an accident, had been used as punishment. Mary, who everyone thought killed, had actually been silenced to protect Nina. That box was more than a buried secret. It was the truth that the entire farm had sworn never to reveal. At the bottom of the iron box under the yellowish documents, there was an object covered by a thin cotton cloth. Nina took him carefully and felt the rough texture of the dry leather. It was an ancient, hand-sewn diary, with the cracked time and fire marks on the edges. Inside, an almost erased name, Maria de Paz Barbosa. The first pages were stained, some illegible, but others revealed the intimacy of a passionate and tormented woman. Nina Lia, with a tight heart, reports about nights hidden in the stable, Juras whispered between the shadows and the promise of a future next to someone who could never love publicly. The diary told how, upon discovering the pregnancy, Maria was expelled and threatened not by strangers, but by the family of the man who said to love her. On the central page, a stretch in red ink stood out. "If something happens to me, let me know. I never abandoned her. I fought everything I could to protect her. The truth can be buried, but the blood calls. One day she will come back. And when you come back, to read these words and know the woman who generated her." Nina hugged the diary hard. Her hands trembled, but her spirit remained firm. As he left the barn, He took the box, the diary and the weight of that unlisted story. Her mother was waiting for her under the tree, more pale, weaker. But when he saw the diary in his daughter, he smiled, the smile of those who, even on the edge of the end, know that it will finally be heard. The truth was beginning to breathe. The field was already shadow when Nina returned to the foot of the tree. The daylight gave in to the dark blue of the twilight, and the dried leaves covered the floor like a silent rug. There, where before his mother was waiting for her with her eyes full of past, now there was only the curved body of a fallen woman, fragile as a forgotten prayer. Nina ran, kneeling beside her. Maria de Paz still breathed, but her face was pale, her purple lips. The eyes opened with difficulty, and in the reflection of the dilated pupils, the girl saw a world of stories, wounds and damned love. "You came back. My flower came back," said the mother with a torn voice of emotion. Nina held her hand tightly. "I saw everything. I read the diary. I know you tried. I know you really loved me in silence." The words came out in sobs, but they carried a firmness that Mary seemed to recognize. The woman tried to sit down, but the body didn't allow it. "I was buried alive for their fear. Only the bull kept me. Only him." As the dried leaves danced with the wind around, the girl hugged her mother as holding a cracked vase about to shatter. And there, on the sacred ground of reunion, he understood that that moment was not only the end of a search, it was also the beginning of a new truth. And time finally knelt before the love that survived everything. The wind stopped. For a moment the world seemed suspended in time, as if nature itself respected that moment of farewell. Nina felt something hot drain between her fingers as she held her mother's hand. He looked at the floor. The blood stains the grass, spreading silently as a late confession. It was little but constant, and definitive. Maria de Paz closed her eyes between words. "They tried to shut me up, but you heard me, daughter." His voice was a breath of life, a petal resisting the fall. Nina cried without sound, tears dripping in silence, as if she didn't want to scare the last light in her mother's soul. The smell of farewell was in the air, not death, but of liberation. "You're stronger than I was. Brave. I was afraid. But you don't." Her hand squeezed her daughter for the last time, but not only the blood, but a lineage, a story, a name that could finally be said without fear. "Take the diary. Do justice. Don't let anyone delete anymore." With one last breath, Maria de Paz rested her head on her daughter's lap. The sky, now taken for violet and dark blue tones, covered mother and daughter as a cloak of peace. And Nina, even drowned in pain, knew that her mission was still just starting. Because when the truth bleeds, she needs to find voice, and she would be that voice. Still kneeling between the leaves and the blood, Nina ran her hand over her mother's face, delicately, as if she caressed a newborn memory. It was a gesture they had never exchanged, a touch of hand that life, until then, had denied them. There, in that silent exchange, there was more link than any word said. Nina did not know the maternal heat, the smell of lap, the firmness of a hand guiding yours. But at that moment, between the end and the restart, something sacred was completed. It was as if all the time lost were being returned in a single gesture. Mother and daughter, finally, touching as if they had never been separated. Meanwhile, the earth around it seemed to be quiet. The birds stopped singing, and even the wind that blew between the branches respected the silence of that scene. Maria de Paz's body no longer reacted, but the last touch was still present, engraved on the skin, soul, in the fate of that girl who was now becoming a woman. It was then that Nina took a voiceless oath. He squeezed the diary against his chest, cleared his tears with his mother's embroidered scarf and stood up. The once trembling hand, now firm, touched his mother's forehead. No matter what fear, nor what to come later, she would make the name Mary of Peace never be whispered with shame again. When Nina lastly leaned over her mother's body, she realized that Mary of Peace's lips still moved, almost imperceptibly. She approached, her face inches from hers, her attentive ears, her heart standing in her chest. And then he heard a single word, blown as a secret carried by a lifetime. Forgiveness. That word crossed Nina like an arrow made of flesh and memory. It was not a request, it was a delivery. Maria didn't apologize for leaving her because she never wanted to leave her. He asked for forgiveness for everything he could not prevent, for everything he silent, for everything he carried alone. And in that whisper there was love, pain, and a deep rest. Nina cried, but not despair. His tears were now acceptance. He understood that the mother, in her last seconds, did not want to clean her name or justify herself. I just wanted her daughter to know that until the end she loved her. And so he asked for forgiveness, not for weakness but for greatness, because only those who love with the whole body can say goodbye like this. The body then silent. The chest no longer climbed. The eyes, open, stared at the sky. Nina closed them with the palm of his hand softly, as if he ends a chapter without scoring with pain. There, under the field where the mother suffered, died and was reborn, was the word that sealed everything. Forgiveness. And with it, the strength to continue. Nina remained there for a moment that they looked like lives. The wind blown back, bringing a serious and familiar sound with it. Hooves stepping the earth. She turned slowly and saw the bull silhouette emerging from the fog. Slow steps, head down. There was no fury, there was mourning. The beast was walking like anyone who recognizes the departure of someone sacred. In facing the animal, Nina finally understood what no one has ever had the courage to say. That bull was never a killer. It was an instrument. Manipulated, provoked, used as a weapon. The tragedy that marked the farm had been designed for fear, power, and shame. The bull went crazy not by instinct but because they forced the impossible. In the diary, Maria revealed how the man who became pregnant and promised love was pressured by her family. When she threatened to reveal the truth, they set the accident during a celebration. They released the bull, an unstable, isolated, abused animal, and placed it before a crowd. Maria saved a boy but was injured. He fled and said he was dead. Since then, the bull was kept alive, released around, as if the earth refused to punish him. But in fact, he wandered as a symbol of a guilt that the entire farm tried to hide. It was the living reflection of injustice, and in a way the silent guardian of the memory of Mary of Peace. Nina didn't move away. He looked into the animal's eyes, now face to face, and said in a low voice, "I know, I understood." And, as if free by those words, the bull snorted slightly, turned, and last disappeared. He was no longer a monster. It was a witness, and now free. The next day, with the diary in hand and the heart in flames, Nina walked to the center of the village. I knew exactly where I needed to go. He searched for the old municipal registry, a high window building and smell of ancient paper. There, behind a wooden counter, was a man who had aged between records and omissions, the clerk Argemiro, who was also a foreman Barbosa farm years ago. She introduced herself, firm. "I'm the daughter of Maria de Paz." The name fell into the environment like a rock in well. The old man widened his eyes, his trembling fingers still holding the pen. I thought that name would never be said here." Nina took the birth certificate from her pocket, found in the box, with blank spaces and only one signature at the end. RFB. Argemiro sat pale. He took a deep breath and took a grimy scarf out of his pocket. "You shouldn't have come back," he murmured, but I already knew it was no use. It showed the diary, page by page, without fear. "Say, who is RFB?" The man took a long time, as if each syllable was a brick of shame being removed from his chest. Then he replied, "Rafael Fernandez Barbosa, the son of the farm owner. His father." The name sounded like a muffled thunder inside Nina. It wasn't just a name, it was the final piece of a puzzle mounted with pain, silence, and absence. Argemiro looked at her with regret. He swore silence on the deathbed. He said his mistake couldn't fall on you. But the truth always finds a way to come back. And at that moment, Nina realized. The justice that her mother waited so much began with that name said aloud. As soon as he left the registry, with the name of his father finally revealed, Nina felt the weight of eyes that followed her through the streets. The previously silent village now seemed restless. Murmurs spread like smoke. The name Barbosa had returned to people's ears, but coming from where they least expected, from the mouth of an orphan girl. In the late afternoon, she returned to the farm to fetch her mother's body and the last belongings. I didn't want Mary of Peace to be unjust to that unjust soil. Upon entering the back door of the main house, where he had never been before, he smelled the moist and mold wood. The heart was rapidly beating. The house kept more secrets, and she was about to discover them. In the corridor that connected the main hall to the old office, the wooden floor snapped every step. But Nina only realized the danger when he heard the first burst of a board leaving. Ran. Behind her, voices. Two men emerged from the shadows with hard expressions and earth-covered hands. Ancient Barbosa family henchmen, who had been watching for that story to come to light for a long time. She crossed the rotten corridor, which threatened to collapse, as if the farm's own ghosts tried swallowing her courage. Parts of the ground bare under their feet, and the boards ranged like laments. But she followed, with the firm diary on her arm and the truth as a shield. He jumped out the window to the back, rolling on the floor of dry, panting, dirty, but alive. The truth was almost buried once again. But now she was the one who ran after justice, and no one else would be able to be silent. That same night, the darkness of the farm was cut by an unexpected flash. Nina, sheltered in a remote shed, saw the flames rise from the main house as if the past itself is crumbling before her eyes. The Barbosa family house burned in silence, without shouts, without sirens, just the crackling of the woods popping like secrets finally freed. She ran to the top of the hill to see better. The light of fire illuminated the field like a stage, and in the center of the tragedy, the silhouette of two men walked away from the shadows. They were the same who had pursued her. They were destroying the tests, erasing what they could. But it was late. The diary was safe, and the memory of Maria de Paz was now too alive to be burned. The fire seemed to have a soul of its own, each flap up as a scream contained for decades. The windows burst in cracks, as if the house rejected their own sins. Nina, in tears, was not afraid. He felt something deeper. It was as if the farm was finally being purified, consumed by the truth she had unearthed. At dawn, only ashes left. Where before was the Barbosa Empire, there was now ruin. But on the other side of the road, on the empty tomb of Maria de Paz, someone had left a red rose and a handwritten note. She lived, and you will live too. Don't stop. Nina kept the ticket in her pocket. There was still more to do. But now, the world knew. The orphan girl's story was much greater than the shame they tried to impose on her. It was made of courage, blood, fire, and memory. In the early hours of the fire, Nina could not sleep. He sat between the ruins of the old shed where tools were once hidden, now reduced to black tablets. The sky was clean, starring, but the air carried the smell of burnt wood, the dismantled history, and, above all, of liberation. And it was there, in the silence of the night, that she started listening. At first he thought it was the wind, or perhaps the exhaustion. But not, they were voices. Tiny whispers, such as dry leaves being turned by invisible hands. Female, old, firm voices, as if carrying whole generations of silenced pain. They came from the fallen walls, the roots, the land that Mary of Peace never wanted to abandon. Now you know, they murmured. Now you can talk. It was as if the land itself wanted Nina to follow, not just for her mother, but for all the women who were silent before, those who loved it in secret, those who bleed by the shame of others, those who disappeared without a name. Her story was now many. With his eyes closed, with the diary on his lap, Nina answered in a low voice, "I'll tell you. No one else will forget." And at that moment, a hot breeze enveloped her, as if embraced by faceless voices. The dawn was no longer cold. It was a belly full of stories waiting to be born. When Nina crossed the orphanage gates again, the place seemed smaller. The walls that once looked giant now were just faded walls for time. The caregivers watched her with confused looks. They waited to see the orphan girl from before, silent, with her eyes low. But whoever came back now was someone who knew his name, his story, and his strength. Dona Berenice, the director, walked to her with slow steps. He opened his mouth to say something, but Nina was faster. He handed him the diary and ticket found in the grave. "You knew. I always knew." The woman lowered her eyes, embarrassed, and didn't say a word. For the first time, Nina saw the blame she once shaped on an adult face. The children approached, curious. One of them held Nina's hand and asked, "Did you find your mother?" She crouched down, looking at the girl in her eyes. "I found it, and now, I'll tell her story to anyone who wants to hear." The other children gathered around, and there, in the courtyard where he so often swept his tears in silence, Nina began to narrate what she lived with a firm voice, as if she understands the value of each scar. That night, he slept in the same bed as always, but the ceiling no longer looked so cold. Your dreams were different. No more absence, but with roots. Now she knew who it was. And more than that, I knew who would choose to be. The next morning, Nina woke up before all other children. He sat on the edge of the bed and took the embroidered scarf from his pocket that he had found in the first steps of this journey, the same fabric that his mother wore on her hair, the same symbol that adorned the farm gate and now seemed to be pulsate like a living inheritance. When opening the fabric carefully, he noticed that there was something sewn inside the fold. A thin, almost invisible seam made by hand with red line. Deliciously, he undid the points and found there, bent as a final secret, a small aged roll, written with the unmistakable handwriting of Maria de Paz. It was a will not of goods, but of soul. "For my daughter, Nina, never be ashamed of the blood she carries. Know that her story began in silence, but it was made to be told aloud. That turns pain into the way, and that no less accepts than the world owes you. You are my courage that will walk up." Nina read the words silent, the roll between her fingers as a piece of her own mother still present. It was the farewell that could not be spoken, the blessing that crossed death to touch the daughter with purpose. The scarf, before memory cloth, was now a mission symbol. She doubled the paper with love, kept him in the diary, and arrested the handkerchief in her hair as her mother did. That was no longer just an accessory, it was a banner. Nina now carried a will of truth, justice, and voice. 2 weeks later, Nina's story won wings. Maria de Paz's diary was handed over to a neighboring city journalist, known for investigating the rotten of the powerful. He was shocked by the content and promised to publish everything. In a few days, local newspapers printed headlines that no one ever thought of reading. Barbosa Fazenda involved in abuse, silencing, and attempted murder scandal. The authorities were pressured. The Public Prosecution Service opened an investigation. The 2 henchmen who had chased Nina disappeared from the village, but were soon found. One of them, in exchange for a penalty reduction, confessed the plan that culminated in the bull's attack, and revealed that Mary's death had been simulated at the behest of the patriarch himself to protect the surname. But the most unexpected part came from where Nina would never imagine. From the official will of Rafael Fernandez Barbosa, her father. Keeping by an old family lawyer, the document was revealed after the news exploded. In it, it was stated that, in the event of the death of the holder and the absence of recognized legitimate heirs, goods would be intended for social causes. But in a final clause written by hand, he said, "If one day my daughter Nina appears, that everything is given to him. For it was the only true thing I left in this world." Justice did not come with fury, nor with shouts, came with papers, evidence, names said in public, and came hard. The farm was blocked in court. The land was intended to create a shelter for women victims of violence. And Nina, now legally recognized as a legitimate daughter, turned the name that had excluded her into the weapon she would free others. Months later, the orphanage where Nina spent almost all her life was different. The walls had been painted, the kids smiled more often, and in the main courtyard there was now a garden simple but full of color. In the center of it, a small bronze plate, Jardim Maria de Paz, where flowers are born even on difficult soil. Nina, now with documents in hand and a future outlined by her own choices, has returned to the orphanage not as an orphan, but as the founder of a family, free girls listening and support project. She didn't just want to remember her mother. She wanted to be, for others, what she never had. A presence that looks in her eyes and says, "You have value." The children surrounded her, admired. Some asked to hear the history of the bull again, others about the diary. But what they asked most was, "How did you find out who it was?" And she always responded with the same serene smile. "I found out when I understood that my name was not just what they wrote on a paper. That's what my mother whispered in my ear before leaving." Nina de Paz Barbosa. This was the name that now stamped on his new document, the foundation badge, the plate at the door of the former director's office. A name that united the pain of history with the dignity of truth. A name that echoed strength, memory, and rebirth. And so, the girl without surname became the woman who carried two, the mother who resisted, and the father who silent but finally gave her passage. And with each step, every speech, every touch, Nina remembered the world that the true inheritance is made of courage. And that, yes, she now had a name. And with him, he gave his name to justice.